We are not just standing on the earth. We are rising from it. The salt in our blood remembers ocean iron drifts through us like a red river, starborn, stone bred. When I kneel to the soil, it is not devotion to something outside of me. It is homecoming. The earth is not beneath our feet. It is inside our breathing. Words of Bridget Anna McNeil, read so powerfully by our very own Alex Welch. Writers and prophets, scientists and elders, mystics and mothers have been telling us across centuries that we are not visitors to this earth, that we are the earth itself, made briefly into consciousness. And the 15th chapter of the Lotus Sutra that LB just so beautifully shared about, which is also one of my sacred spiritual texts and one of the great spiritual texts of Mahayana Buddhism, it holds this image that I tend to return to again and again. It spoke about these bodhisattvas, these beings of compassion, compassionate action committed to the liberation of all. And LB told the story that they don't descend from the heavens like rescuers arriving from outside of the crisis. They instead are rooted in the very soil that needs tending, already carrying what the moment requires. And then they rise from the earth itself. Kind of like we are rising from the earth itself. And as much as I love the story from the Lotus Sutra, and as much as I love thinking about these bodhisattvas, mystical beings outside of the earth, we also have to be honest about why and where that rising begins, because this particular moment is not abstract. It's not about something that's written into this long ago sutra. It's about now, and each of the past 11 years has been among some of the warmest on record. I started talking about this last week when I started this series on earth justice and climate conditions. And so I'm just going to continue talking about a little bit more about why this is important. So atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide have never been higher than they have been right now. 40% of our planet's soil is degraded, and 14 million tons of our planet, 14 million tons of plastic enter our oceans every year. That deep breath and that just pause I had to take was because, oh my gosh, it can be just overwhelming to even read it when I think about also the forests the size of 300 football fields, y'all. According to earth.org, they are disappearing every hour. Populations of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles have declined by an average of 68% in just 50 years. I know it's hard, and environmental protections built over decades are being dismantled with the stroke of a pen. Resources that communities have depended on are being pulled away. I gotta say this, that even here in Atlanta, we know that this reality isn't distant. I touched on it last week. South Atlanta neighborhoods are 8 to 12 degrees hotter than the tree-canopied north. A heat map that traces lines, red lining with devastating precision. Y'all, this is environmental injustice happening to certain communities, and this is not a collection of separate crises. It is one story repeating itself in different landscapes. We do not live single-issue lives. And in addition to this is the thing that was interesting. There was a word that I learned for what many of us are carrying. It's called solastalgia. Have y'all ever heard of this word before, solastalgia? It was coined in 2003 by an environmental philosopher, Glenn Albrecht, and it names something that many of us have not been able to say. That there is a grief that comes of watching an environment that you love being harmed. There's an ache of harm from folks insisting that this isn't happening, that no species aren't becoming extinct. Solastalgia is the homesickness that many are feeling while we're home. And I just want to breathe for a moment and just be with that truth, just for a moment. Last week, We name the temptation to turn away, to move into that loop of fear and disliking. But there is another path, because grief, when honored, it doesn't have to paralyze us. It can be so clarifying. The Dalai Lama reminds us that anger rooted in compassion, grief rooted in compassion, can become energy and courage. Joanna Macy teaches that when grief is spoken aloud, when shared in community, it can allow something to shift. It's important that we give space to feel the grief with each other, because it allows something to shift. Our fuller breath can return. Imagination can return. Life can return. Our values of dignity, justice, interdependence happens as we share this energy together. And they are not soft ideas in moments like this. Our values themselves are the resistance. Us coming together in community around it with a refusal to pretend like the web that we are all connected to is not real. That refusal to ignore that when one thread is pulled, the whole fabric feels it. The refusal to act like this is not happening, that is a part of the resistance. So I want to offer you a question to sit with. Where are you truly feeling solastalgia for a place, for a species, for a future? And can you let yourself feel it honestly enough that it moves you through the pain rather than turn away from it? Because the heartbreak is not the end of the story, it is a doorway. I went through such a doorway not that long ago. It was just 2024 when I participated with thousands of Unitarian Universalists across more than 400 congregations in United States, Mexico, and Canada, and the Virgin Islands for the first ever UU Climate Justice Revival. That was just in 2024, and it woke something in me that stayed with me that I want to share with y'all. It was this invitation. They gave me this invitation to imagine that it is 2050, the year 2050. And when you're imagining this, imagine that we have achieved all of our wildest hopes for collective liberation, where all lives are flourishing, not just a few. Imagine what is present in that imagined reality. What have our values led us to move away from? During this climate justice revival, we were invited to draw a picture of what came up in our minds, to capture what our world would look like if love were at the center of our climate work, and if collective liberation were the unifying goal across all the movements that mattered most. At the time of this climate justice revival, my niece and nephew had just been born. And so for me to imagine the year 2050 was to imagine them in their early 20s. The solastalgia that I was feeling at the time, even though I didn't have the word for it, in 2024, it was a little hard. It was hard for me to dream something good for them, but the community that gathered for this climate justice revival, they held me. And as they were sharing their visions and their testimonies, it opened something in me, this hope for a future I hadn't even imagined. I hadn't even been an artist in a long time, but I was drawing pictures of a future for my niece and my nephew that I hadn't held for myself. And in that moment, I learned that I could dream not just for a better future for them, but for a better world for all of us. And I'm asking y'all, what would your picture look like? It was that experience that led me to bring the idea of a climate justice revival to our climate action team when I arrived at UUCA. And y'all, yesterday was not just an event, it was evidence of a dream come to life. It was evidence that the story is not only about collapse, it is also about response. Y'all, yesterday, 20 organizations came together for a metro-wide interfaith Earth Day celebration in partnership with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And y'all, these folks shared stories and evidence that we are the earth responding. They gave testimonials of permaculture gardens and solar panels and compost bins and pollinator beds and rainwaters. And if you were there, maybe you felt something that's harder to name than any policy win, but it feels just as real. When we were gathered yesterday, I was reminded that we are not alone and that what we are building together, y'all, it is so alive and it is thriving. Y'all, we are doing the work of reversing the feedback loops. Y'all remember last week, I was talking about those feedback loops, the things that cause all the fear to come up. And when we were talking about it, we landed on this place of hope. That nature, if we let it, it can heal itself. Do y'all believe that? I know we touched on some heavy things, and it can be so hard in our human bodies to hold the grief of what is dying, but do y'all believe that the earth itself can reheal itself? We saw some of it during COVID when we went inside and we stopped doing as much extraction, how some things started to come back around. In these ways, nature can become our most powerful ally. In this way, those feedback loops named by Greta Thunberg in the book can be made to run in reverse. And that same interdependence that carried us into crisis, y'all, it can carry us out of it when we help people stop working against the earth, invite them into more climate justice action and working with the earth. For example, last week I talked about the Arctic ice melting mirror running in reverse. The counter to that is regreening, restoring what was paved and bringing back what was lost. And right here on this campus, tree planting, 4 pollinator gardens, a rainwater harvesting system, a solar array powering nearly 2/3 of our building. These are not just ideas or intentions. Y'all, you know, we can be a group of people who will sit and plan and make some really great intentions and really great plans. These are things that we are putting in practice. Things that were made real by Gippel's rewilding grant that somebody had to write and apply for and that we got through the steady leadership of folks like Lee Cook, folks like John Reese, yes, folks like Rob Mitchell. Let's give them some. This work, this relooping of the changing of the feedback loop is made to happen through volunteers who turn vision into material change. This is what is happening when interdependence becomes real and embodied. And then we talked about that permafrost loop where the ancient carbon's releasing that was supposed to stay frozen, but it didn't. That the counter to that is sequestration, returning organic matter to living systems. And I learned about Renee from the Roswell Community Masjid composting food from over 15,000 meals and returning it to the earth landfill. They said that the Quran calls them khulafa, which means stewards and caretakers, because all living beings roaming the earth are communities like yourselves. So they are doing this work because the Quran is telling them to, and that verse, it's also very similar to the Buddhist image of Indra's net that I painted last Sunday, where when we're reaching towards the same truth, that we're not separate from what we harm. We are not separate from what we need to heal. And we are not separate from our interfaith partners doing this work. The loop of intersectional environmental justice also is running in reverse. And I learned that by Reverend Dr. Laura Lane White when she named it plainly for Big Bethel AME on Sweet Auburn, saying that environmental justice is social justice. Sometimes we could be thinking that, oh, you know, climate action team is doing this, and then we got immigrant action team doing this. We're one and the same. We are not single. We do not live single issue lives. Dr. White said environmental justice is social justice and went on to say that creation care is kingdom work. For a historic Black church to commit to zero waste, to solar power, to electric vehicle, that's not a trend, y'all. That is an act of liberation. That's not a footnote in the climate movement. It is the movement becoming what it has always needed to be. Big Bethel knows that the heat islands of South Atlanta that I was talking about last week, that the contaminated watersheds of the West Side, the communities of color bearing the weight of the harms that they did not create, that none of these are accidents. It means a lot for a historically Black church to be talking about these things. Yes. And then there's the loop of delusion. Y'all, let's imagine that interrupted. When... Oh my gosh. So yesterday, I learned that when data center expansions threaten to drive explosive energy demand across Georgia, when costs and consequences falling on the communities least able to absorb them, there's this group, the Science for Georgia. They came together and translated the science of what was happening into plain language that communities could hold. They created this video that reached over 17,000 people that made an impact. It made a difference. And that video, because it didn't lecture, it taught people, it equipped them for going forward. And then it influenced the work that they did in the 2026 legislative season that forced those in power to shut down Senate rather than hold a vote that they knew that they could lose. This is what Science for Georgia was doing. Yes, give it up for them, because somebody got to take it to the legislators. Translating science into understandable information is a hard thing to do, and evidence shared in relationship, it changes outcomes. Every one of these testimonies is the earth responding to the people who answered her call. And I'm asking y'all, which of these kind of feedback loops running in reverse do you feel like you want to get a part of in your own life, in your own neighborhood, maybe in this community, because we are the response. Y'all know that, right? Yeah. Good. I'm always got to just make sure that y'all know. And I don't never want to be just preaching to the choir. Because eventually this whole message has to become personal, not in isolation, but in relationship. So in the book, A Future We Can Love, when it asks, what will I do, and what will you do, and what will we do together? These are not individual questions. They land as covenantal questions. We know that we are, well, when I say we as Unitarian Universalists are covenantal people who come together not just in the building, but we come together as people who make promises to one another, to this earth, and to the future that we are shaping together. And those promises ask something of us. Indigenous scholar Lila Junes names this relationship as ke. It means kinship and interdependence. It's love enacted in relationship. And she reminds us that crisis is not only devastation, it is also an invitation to dismantle what harms and rebuild what sustains. And in those times, if we listen in closely, even in the midst of loss, we can hear and see that there is still wonder. There was a story that was shared in the book of a scientist watching a seal beneath the melting ice. Neither of them were moving, and you can see this video of a seal and a human looking at each other, both curious. And this little video was a reminder that love for what is at stake, the love that was between this human and this seal, this was not just curiosity. It was love enacted. And it became a part of the fuel for this scientist to keep showing up. It can be a part of the fuel that makes the work sustainable across the long haul. So here is where I want to land with this, you naming what you love that may be at stake. Maybe it's your love of trees or manatees, or maybe it's your niece and nephew's dreams. Let that love move you to, I know that most of us are very active in justice work, and all of this is just to move you a little bit more deeper into it, to invite someone else to join you in taking action into the work that's already unfolding right here. You can join our climate action team, or you can put your hands in the soil with partners like the historic West Side Gardens. You can stay connected through the UU Ministry for the Earth. I don't know if y'all know about UUMFE.org, but y'all can check out our national organization and join their Earth Day online event that's happening on April 22nd, that's Wednesday, and plug into UU's national efforts. You can also vote for policies and leaders who take climate seriously. And I was so glad that someone reminded me, did y'all know that tomorrow is the last day to make sure that you are registered to vote? Yes. And that early voting starts for the midterm April 27th through May 19th. I got to put a plug in for that, because that is how you vote your policies into action. You can also reduce your footprint on the earth in ways that are genuinely sustainable for your own life. Support organizations on the ground and just keep talking about it, because silence is one of the strongest loops that we have to break. Just talking about climate justice and standing with those who are already on the front lines. Not because you have to do everything, but because you can do something. Yes, you can do. We can do something. And when we do that something together, something shifts. The loops start turning, and we are the ones turning them. We're not waiting for a response. We are it. So let us go carrying what we know. That love guides grief into meaning, anger into action, despair into something generative. The future we long for is not waiting somewhere else. It is waiting for us to love it into being.